September 14th, Western Honduras, a decorated commander with 30 years of service reached down, turned off his GPS, powered down his radio, and walked off the map. No struggle, no ambush, no body. He chose to disappear, and he left behind 11 words. For one specific person, Nora Callahan, her father's case. Someone needs to finish it. She was 26 years old, living alone in a Montana cabin, a rifle on the wall she hadn't touched in 14 months. Photograph of her father on the table, a man who had died in Afghanistan 15 years ago in what everyone called an ambush. Everyone was wrong, because buried inside a jungle hacienda in Honduras was a file, financial records, intercepted emails, photographs of American weapons with their serial numbers ground down, and one transaction record, time-stamped to the week before her father's patrol was killed, that described his route, his personnel. His name, Patrick Callahan, didn't die because of the enemy. He died because he found something, reported it, and someone inside the system made sure he never reported anything again. That someone had been sitting in a Washington office for 13 years, and now, 60 feet above the jungle floor, eye to a scope, 4 vehicles approaching without headlights. His time was running out, so was hers. The alarm never rang. It didn't need to. Nora Callahan was already awake at 4:43 in the morning, sitting on the edge of her cot in the dark, listening to the lake. Flathead Lake in November made a sound like the world holding its breath. Ice forming at the edges, wind moving across water that was almost solid. A low, patient groaning that most people never heard because most people were asleep at 4:43 in the morning. Nora was not most people. She stood, rolled her shoulders once, touched the wall beside the cot, not for balance, just to feel the cold wood under her fingertips, grounding, present, here. The kind of ritual that had nothing to do with superstition and everything to do with the fact that some mornings the body needed reminding that it was still in the world. The cabin was 14 feet wide and 22 feet long. She had measured the first week, force of habit. You always measured the space you were sleeping in. You noted the exits. You noted the angles. The distance from your cot to the door was 7 steps. She knew it in the dark the way she knew her own heartbeat. Not because she had memorized it, but because her body had decided it was information worth keeping. One window facing north, one door, east, the rifle on the wall, west. She didn't look at the rifle. She hadn't looked at it directly in 14 months. Not because she was afraid of it. She had never been afraid of it. She had been handling rifles since she was 8 years old on a dirt range in Virginia with her father standing behind her, one hand on her shoulder, his voice low and specific and patient. She didn't look at the rifle because looking at it meant something. It meant a decision she had not yet made. And for 14 months she had been very careful about which decisions she made and which ones she left alone. The run started at 4:51, 6 miles, no headphones, no GPS watch, no app tracking her pace with cheerful chimes at each mile marker, just boots on frozen gravel. Breath turning white in the dark. The sound of Flathead Lake slowly disappearing behind her as she climbed into the tree line, 19 degrees Fahrenheit. She didn't feel it the way she used to feel cold. She felt it differently now, like a fact, like gravity. Like something that simply existed, and arguing with it was a form of energy she had decided to spend on other things. Her stride was long and even on the uphill, shorter on the technical ground, where the frozen gravel gave way to exposed root systems and the occasional patch of ice that caught the thin moonlight and looked, for a half second, like something else entirely. She didn't slow down for any of it. She had run this route enough times that her feet knew it without being told, which was a kind of luxury she had not had in a long time. Knowing where you were going. Knowing the ground under your feet. At mile 2, her left knee sent up its usual complaint. Not sharp. Never sharp anymore. Sharp had been the first 6 months after Djibouti, when the bone and the surrounding tissue were still finding their new arrangement, after the shrapnel had been removed and the wound had been closed, and everyone had written in their reports that she had recovered fully. The medical report was optimistic. Her left knee had read the report and disagreed. Now the complaint was dull and deep and radiating, the particular ache of something that had been damaged and healed and was never going to be exactly what it was before. She had learned not to negotiate with it. You acknowledged it the way you acknowledged weather. Not because acknowledgement changed anything, but because pretending it wasn't there was how you ended up making decisions the knee would win anyway. She kept running. At mile 4, the sky started to change. Not light exactly. More like the darkness becoming less certain of itself. A faint gray bled into the eastern horizon that could have been dawn or could have been nothing at all, and she ran toward it anyway, the way she had always run toward uncertain things. With the understanding that uncertainty was not a reason to stop, at mile 6, she stopped at the same boulder she stopped at every morning, flat granite shelf about 3 feet off the ground that she had found on the first week and claimed without thinking much about it. She sat on it, let her breathing slow, watched the gray become something more like blue, watched the lake appear below her out of the dark, first just a suggestion of flat space, then the actual water, then the ice at the edges catching what little light there was. She thought about her father. She did that every morning. Not dramatically, not with the kind of grief that bent you double or arrived with sound effects. Just, she thought about him the way you thought about someone who had fundamentally shaped the way you moved through the world. Patrick Callahan had taught her to run like this, not for fitness, for clarity. Your body knows things your brain hasn't figured out yet, he used to say. Let it work. She had never asked him what he meant by that. She was 12 and she thought she had time for questions later. She ran back to the cabin. The photograph was on the table, not on the wall. She had taken it down from the wall 8 months ago, and she was still not entirely sure why. Maybe because she was tired of him looking down at her from a height. Maybe because she wanted him closer, at eye level, where he felt less like a memorial and more like company. Either way, the photograph lived on the table now, propped against a coffee mug that had a crack in the handle she had never bothered to replace. And when she sat down to eat her breakfast, oatmeal, black coffee, exactly the same every morning, the same proportions, the same order, the same chair. She sat across from it, Master Chief Patrick Callahan, SEAL Team 6. The photograph was taken somewhere sunny. He was squinting against the light. He was almost smiling, not quite committing to it. The way he always held back the full thing, like smiling completely, was a form of vulnerability he reserved very specific occasions. He was wearing civilian clothes, and he looked uncomfortable in them, the way career military men often looked when they weren't in uniform. Like the clothes didn't quite fit the shape of who they were underneath. He had been dead for 15 years. She ate her oatmeal. He kept almost smiling. The black coffee was too hot and she drank it anyway, the same way she ran through the cold and acknowledged the knee and sat with the silence. Some things you just move through. That was the whole lesson, maybe, the only one that mattered. You moved through things, and you kept your form, and you came out the other time still standing. She washed her bowl, washed her mug, set them in the drying rack with the particular deliberateness of someone who understood that small ordered things were a kind of armor. She looked at the photograph one more time before going to stand at the window. The lake was doing its November thing. The far shore was invisible in the low gray light. The ice at the edges had grown another inch overnight. Another week and it would reach the middle, and after that it would be solid all the way across, and the groaning would stop, and there would just be silence and white. She had been thinking about that lately, about the silence after. She didn't know yet what she thought about it. The sound of a truck engine reached her at 8:17 in the morning. She was washing the counter. Not because the counter needed washing, but because her hands needed something to do, which happened sometimes, which she managed the way she managed everything else when the sound at first. Then closer. Then slowing, not unusual. The road past the cabin occasionally saw logging trucks, Forest Service vehicles, the odd hunter who had taken a wrong turn on a forest access road and needed to turn around. She noted it the way she noted everything, filed it under. Probably nothing. Continued wiping the counter. The engine slowed more. Stopped. She set the cloth down. 7 steps to the door. She did not take them. Instead, she moved to the north window, standing to one side of it, never center, never silhouetted against interior light, and looked out at an angle. Government plates. Not Forest Service green. Standard Montana issue, but the vehicle was wrong for a civilian. A dark blue Ford F-50, clean despite the November roads, which meant it had been driven recently and washed recently, which meant someone had thought about appearances. Someone wanted the vehicle to look like nothing in particular and had made a deliberate effort in that direction. A man in his late 40s was getting out. Civilian jacket, reasonable quality. But the way he moved when he closed the door, careful, deliberate, head already turning to assess the property in the unhurried way of someone running a quick situational inventory. That was not civilian at all. She knew the walk. She had grown up around men who walked like that. She crossed to the west wall. She took the Remington 700 down from its mount. The weight of it was complicated. 14 months of complicated, settling into her hands all at once, like something that had been waiting for her to pick it up, and was relieved she finally had. She did not chamber around. She held it at low ready, barrel angled toward the floor, and went to stand beside the door with her back to the wall and her shoulder blades touching the wood. He knocked twice, paused. Knocked again, Ms. Callahan. A measured pause. My name is Stellan Briggs. I'm with the Defense Intelligence Agency. I'd like to talk to you. I'm going to slide my credentials under the door first, so you can see them before you decide anything. She heard the paper scraping across the threshold. She did not move to look at it. I came alone, he said from the other side of the door. His voice was even. Not performing calm, actually calm, which was different. And I'm not here in any official capacity. I want to be upfront about that. That part is important. She thought about that last sentence for a long moment. Not here in any official capacity. The DIA officer who drove to a remote Montana cabin in November without official authorization and announced the fact immediately upon arrival was either the most alarming thing she could imagine or the most honest. She was not certain those two things were mutually exclusive. She opened the door. Stellan Briggs was exactly what he sounded like. Built like a man who had spent his career in rooms rather than fields, but had not forgotten that fields existed. Careful, deliberate, the particular kind of tired that had nothing to do with last night, and everything to do with accumulated years of doing something that cost more than it paid in obvious ways. He had dark circles under his eyes and a jaw that needed a shave and boots that were actually broken in. Real use, not decorative, which meant he had been somewhere other than an office recently. He looked at the Remington in her hands. He did not react. That told her something useful. You can put that down, he said, or you can keep holding it. Either way, I'll keep holding it. That's fine. He said it like he meant it, like he had expected no other answer and had no objection to it. May I come in? She stepped back. He came in. He looked at the cabin the way she would have looked at it. Quick, thorough, not obvious about it. Cataloging. One exit, one rifle on the wall, one rifle in her hands. No personal photographs except. He saw the photograph on the table. Something moved across his face, fast. She almost missed it, a recognition that had some weight to it. Not surprise exactly. More like the difference between knowing something intellectually and then seeing it sitting on a table across from a coffee mug with a cracked handle. You look like him, he said quietly. Not a compliment. An observation. The kind of thing a person said when a resemblance was stronger than they had prepared for. You have approximately 4 minutes, she said, before I stop being curious about why you're here. He sat down at the table without being invited, set a manila folder on the table beside her father's photograph. He placed both hands flat on the surface, palms down, fingers spread, the posture of someone who wanted their hands visible and wanted you to know they wanted their hands visible. Commander James Rutherford, he said. SEAL Team 3. Do you know that name? The room went very still, or maybe that was just her. I know the name, she said. She had known the name her whole life, the way she knew certain other things. The weight of a properly balanced rifle, the smell of gun oil, the specific silence that fell over a house when someone who had been filling it with presence was suddenly not there anymore. James Rutherford and Patrick Callahan had gone through Bud S together in 1987. Class 164. One of the coldest winters on record at Coronado, which was saying something because Coronado's winters were specifically designed to make a man question every decision that had led him to this particular beach at this particular hour. Her father had told her the story exactly once, when she was 9 years old, sitting on the dock behind their house in Virginia Beach with their feet dangling over the water and the sun going sideways into the Chesapeake. There was this guy, her father had said. He had the way of talking about men he respected that made the respect sound almost like an afterthought, almost like he was mentioning something obvious that didn't require emphasis. Biggest guy in the class. Could have carried the whole class on his back and still passed the swim tests. And in Hell Week, when everyone was past their limit, past what they thought their limit was, past the place where the body made reasonable arguments about stopping, this guy looked over at me and said, "You know what's funny? We're still here." And he laughed. Like it was genuinely the funniest thing he'd ever encountered. Like the joke was so good it was worth being that cold and that exhausted to hear it. She had asked if Rutherford made it through. Her father had smiled in the way he smiled when something pleased him quietly. We both did. She had been 9. She had not fully understood what that story was about. She understood it now. She had understood it for a long time. Commander James Rutherford was listed as missing, presumed dead. He had been on an operational mission in western Honduras 14 days ago. GPS signal had gone dark. His radio had gone dark. A search team had been dispatched and it had found nothing. No signs of enemy contact, no signs of a struggle, no evidence of any engagement at all. No body. He's gone, Briggs said. Officially and unofficially. He opened the folder. Turned it toward her. She looked at the photograph satellite image. Time stamped 6 days ago. Location marked as approximately 40 miles south of Soto Cano Air Base, the American military installation in western Honduras that had been operational since the early 1980s. Joint Task Force Bravo, a real base, a permanent presence, the kind of facility that appeared in official D records, and also in the kind of conversations that happened in rooms where the air felt different from regular air. The image showed a small agricultural settlement, a road cutting between low structures, 2 vehicles parked at angles that were, she noticed immediately, not the random angles of civilian parking, but the deliberate angles of people who thought about egress, and a man walking between the vehicles, tall, broad-shouldered, though carrying the slight forward compression of a man in his late 50s who had spent 3 decades doing things that compressed you incrementally. Civilian clothes. Wide-brimmed hat that would have looked like sun protection to anyone who wasn't paying attention. She was paying attention. She was always paying attention. She looked at his right hand, the position of his thumb, the angle of his fingers as they hung at his side. There was a specific way the hand rested, indexed, controlled, thumb at a particular angle relative to the palm. That was not casual and was not random. It was trained. It was the posture of someone who had spent enough years with a sidearm on their hip that the ready position had become the resting position. A habit from a specific era of SEAL training, the late 1980s. Before the doctrine changed in the mid-2000s, her father had held his hands that way. Always. Even in the grocery store. Even at her school plays. Even in the photograph on the table, if you knew to look. She looked up at Briggs. "He's alive," she said. "Yes, and he wasn't captured." Briggs was quiet for a moment, the particular way of a man who has thought very carefully about how to say something and has arrived at an answer that is true but incomplete. "No," said finally. "He wasn't captured." She set the Remington down on the table beside the folder, set it down carefully. "The way you set down something that mattered." He walked away. The GPS was turned off manually. The specific power-down sequence used on his radio is the one a trained operator uses when they're deliberately shutting down comms, not the randomized, rapid sequence that happens when something bad occurs quickly. He packed a go-bag 12 hours before the mission departed. The bag contained 2 items beyond his standard operational kit. Briggs paused. He chose to disappear. Deliberately, methodically, with preparation, she stared at the photograph. 30 years of service. Career built on the premise that you did not leave your post, that you did not abandon your unit, that you did not walk off the edge of the map, unless the map itself had become the problem. "Why me?" she said. "Why are you standing in my cabin in Montana specifically?" Briggs reached into the folder and produced a single sheet of paper. Clean paper, printed text, formatted like a transcription because it was a transcription. "The last transmission we have from him," he said, before his radio went dark. 11 words. She looked at the paper. Nora Callahan, her father's case. "Someone needs to finish it." She read it twice, slowly, the way you read something when you want to make sure you understood it correctly the first time. Then she put it down, flat on the table, face up. She did not turn it over. She left it where it was in the open, because it was a fact and she had decided a long time ago that she did not hide from facts. "What's my father's case?" she said. Briggs met her eyes. His were steady. "That's the part I don't have access to. Whatever Rutherford found, whatever he's carrying, it exists in no file I can reach. And I can reach a significant number of files." She was quiet for a long moment. "Why are you doing this?" she said. "Said you're not here in any official capacity. Which means this is personal. Which means something brought you to this specifically, to me specifically, at personal risk because," Briggs said, "I've been in this system for 22 years. And occasionally, 22 years you see something that you cannot unknow, and you have to decide what to do with it." He paused. "I decided to drive to Montana." She looked at him for a moment, then she said, "I need everything you brought. The satellite imagery, the mission record fragments, whatever you have on the Djibouti targeting chain." Briggs reached for the folder. "Some of this will be, you said you could access a significant number of files." She pulled her chair out and sat down across from him, across from her father's photograph. "Then let's start." Spread documents across her kitchen table with the practiced efficiency of someone who had lived inside filing systems long enough to think in their architecture. She read fast. She always had. Her father used to say she didn't read, she scanned, like you already know what you're looking for even when you don't. He was right. She was looking for the shape of something, the outline of a pattern. The place where ordinary things stopped being ordinary. Rutherford's deployment record was clean in the way that records were clean when someone had spent time making them clean. Surfaces smooth, nothing protruding. 30 years, 23 overseas deployments, 4 command rotations. SEAL Team 3, Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, California. Specialization in Central and South American operational theaters going back to Panama in 1989, before she was born, when the world was a different set of problems with the same underlying architecture, then Honduras. 14 days ago, the official mission record was 4 pages of language designed to mean everything and nothing simultaneously. Reconnaissance assessment, operational evaluation, kind of phrasing that told you something was happening without telling you anything about what it was. And then at 03:17 in the morning on September 14th, the record simply stopped. The next entry was a deletion log. Not a classification upgrade, not a transfer to a higher security tier, not an archival movement that would have left a retrievable trace, a deletion, time-stamped to a specific terminal. In the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, Washington, D.C., the building where the staff of the National Security Council worked. The building that sat, physically, inside the White House complex, separated from the West Wing by a few hundred feet of carefully maintained grounds and a very clear understanding of proximity to power. She looked at that timestamp for a long time. Who had access to that terminal at? She looked at the time, 4:02 in the morning. Not many people. That's not an answer, no, Briggs said. It's not. He looked at her steadily. It's the reason I drove to Montana, she nodded. Set that page aside. Picked up the next one, her discharge from Marthsock. She had read this document before. She had read it multiple times in the weeks after it was issued, the way you read something you didn't fully believe, looking for the specific words that would make it make sense. She had not found them. She had put the document away in the wooden box under her cot with her uniform and had not taken it back out. She read it again now. The ROE classification on the Djibouti engagement, Briggs said. The specific language used in your determination. Cross-referenced it across the system. That exact phrasing appears in 3 other proceedings. 3 other operators, all discharged within the past 4 years, all of whom had operational exposure to Central American supply chains in the 12 months before their discharge proceedings. She looked at him over the top of the page. The man I shot in Djibouti, she said. His name appears in a procurement document that was misfiled into a DUD contractor database approximately 18 months ago. He was a logistics coordinator. He moved things, specifically, he moved things along a supply route that connects warehousing near Soto Cano Air Base in Honduras with distribution points further south. Briggs paused. He was part of the same network that Rutherford was investigating when he disappeared. He set the document down. There it was. The shape of it. They had pointed her at a man in their own network. She'd had done what she was trained to do. She had been precise and effective and professionally correct. And then they had used the fact of what she had done. The documented, official, defensible fact of an operator who had engaged an unauthorized target to remove her from service before she could form a question about why that particular man had been presented to her in that particular moment, not a mistake, not an accident. A transaction. She had been a tool that had served its purpose and been set aside. They used me, she said. Not loudly, not with any particular heat, just clearly. The way you said something when you had been looking at it sideways for 14 months and had finally turned to face it directly. I believe so, Briggs said, and now someone inside the NSC is running interference on the investigation into the same network. Yes, and Rutherford walked off the map because he found something he couldn't bring back through the official channels, because those channels are compromised. That's my assessment. She stood up, walked to the north window, looked out at the lake, the gray sky that never quite decided what it wanted to be. She had built this life carefully. 14 months of careful, the same run every morning, the same breakfast, the same chair at the same table. The rifle on the wall she did not touch. She had built it carefully because she understood that careful was what she had available, and careful was enough. But the rifle was not on the wall right now. She had taken it down when she heard the truck. Her body had known before she did. Your body knows things your brain hasn't figured out yet. I need everything you have, she said. And then I need to make a phone call. By the time Briggs left, the afternoon light was doing its November thing. Thin and pale and unconvincing, like an argument it knew it was going to lose. She stood in the doorway and watched his truck until it disappeared around the bend in the access road. She went inside, sat at the table across from her father. He was still almost smiling. "Okay," she said to him. Not out loud. Or maybe out loud. She wasn't always sure anymore, alone in the cabin with no one to notice the difference. "Okay, let's figure out what you found." She pulled her phone across the table, found the number she had memorized the way she memorized things that she might need in extremity, automatically, without making a decision about it, the information just filing itself away under important, possibly necessary, hope you never need it. 3 rings. Ox. The line picked up, a voice low and deliberate and unsurprised in the way that only men who had been waiting for certain calls for a long time could be unsurprised. "It's Nora Callahan." She paused. "I need to come to Houston." Leon Warren was quiet for exactly 1 beat. "How soon?" he said. "Tomorrow morning. I'll have coffee ready." She hung up. She crossed to the west wall. She picked up the Remington, not to put it away, not to carry it, just to hold it for a moment, to acknowledge what it meant that she had picked it up today. Then she mounted it back on the wall, in its place, where it would be when she needed it next. She pulled the wooden box from under the cot, opened it. The MARSOC uniform was folded with a precision that had survived 14 months untouched, every crease sharp, every fold exact, the kind of precision that became unconscious after enough time, and then became something like faith. She did not take it out. She looked at it for a moment, then she packed her go-bag. She had never entirely unpacked it. Some part of her had always known this was temporary. The cabin, the oatmeal, the 6 miles, the photograph moved from wall to table. All of it was necessary. None of it was permanent. She zipped the bag, set it by the door, looked at the photograph one last time. "Someone needs to finish it," she said. He kept almost smiling. She turned off the light. Houston in November was a different kind of cold than Montana. Wet, persistent, the kind of cold that found the gap between your collar and your neck before you knew it was looking. She landed at George Bush Intercontinental at 7:20 in the morning and drove a rental car south through streets that were already fully operational in the way Houston was always fully operational, as if the city ran a different clock than the rest of the country and had simply decided that 7 a.m. was mid-morning. Leon Warren lived in a converted warehouse space in a district that had been industrial 20 years ago and was in the process of becoming something else, in the slow, uncertain way of neighborhoods that hadn't quite decided what they were becoming. He had done the conversion himself over 3 years, piece by piece, the way he apparently did everything, with his own hands, in his own time, without delegating the parts that mattered to someone who wouldn't know how they mattered. She had met him exactly once before, her father's memorial. She had been 11. She remembered standing in a church that smelled like candles and someone's too strong cologne, surrounded by men in dress uniform who kept crouching down to talk to her at her level, which she had appreciated in some and found condescending in others. Leon Warren had crouched down. He was the biggest man in the room by several inches, and when he got down to her level it seemed like a significant physical commitment, and he had looked her in the eyes and said, "Your father was the best man I ever stood next to. I want you to know that. You can forget everything else anyone tells you today, but hold on to that." She had held on to it. He opened the door before she knocked, looked at her for a long moment. The specific look of someone who was searching for a face they already knew inside a face they were meeting for the first time, and finding it. "You've got Patrick's eyes," he said. "People keep telling me that, because it keeps being true." He stepped back from the door. "Come in. Coffee's on." The warehouse smelled like machine oil and fresh paint, and something being cooked that she couldn't immediately identify. The main floor was high-ceilinged and open, organized in the deliberate way of someone who had thought carefully about where each thing should live, and then put it there and left it there without second-guessing. Tools along one wall, organized by size and function, a workbench with something engine-related in careful disassembly, and one full wall of maps, not decorative maps, not the kind of maps people put on walls because they look interesting. Tactical maps, Central America, detailed. South America, segmented into operational zones she recognized. 3 separate sections of the Middle East, all of them pinned, annotated, marked with the kind of notations that came from being in those places rather than reading about them. He hadn't stopped working. He had just changed the theater. "Stellan Briggs called me yesterday afternoon," Ox said, handing her a mug. "The coffee was strong and real. After he left you, he told me he came to Montana without authorization. He called me after because he figured you'd call me after." A pause. He figured right. She sat at the table, wrapped both hands around the mug. What do you know about Rutherford and Honduras? Ox sat across from her, set his own mug down, quiet for a moment in the considered way of a man who was choosing among several true things and was being careful about which one he led with. 3 weeks before the mission, he said, "Rutherford called me." He didn't say much. He never said much on calls. Old habit, even on secure lines. He said he was looking at something in Honduras that he couldn't move through official channels. He needed someone outside the system to hold a piece of it. What piece? Ox reached to the shelf behind him without looking, in the way of a man who knew exactly where everything in his space was located. He set a folded piece of paper on the table. She opened it. Coordinates, GPS coordinates, handwritten, in the tight economical handwriting of someone who had been trained to put maximum information into minimum space. She recognized the format, the way the degrees and minutes were notated, the shorthand for elevation. It was seal notation from the early 2000s, specific style that Rutherford's generation had used. He said, "If I don't come back, give this to Nora Callahan." Ox paused. He didn't explain why you specifically. I didn't ask. I knew Patrick. I knew about you. I didn't need it spelled out. She looked at the coordinates. 40 miles south of Sotocano, western Honduras. Dense terrain that was good for disappearing into if disappearing was what you needed. He's there, she said, most likely. And he's carrying something physical, something he can't transmit through official channels because those channels are compromised. That's my read. Then we need to, a voice from above them. We definitely need to. She looked up. A narrow metal staircase she hadn't fully registered led to a lofted workspace above the main floor. A man in his early 30s was coming down it with a laptop under one arm, and the slightly distracted expression of someone who had been very focused on something and was making the adjustment to being present with other people. He was thin in the way of people who forgot to eat when they were working. Dark circles under his eyes, an ink stain on his left index finger that was too specific to be recent, Declan Marsh. She had read the file Briggs had included on potential assets, former SEAL Team 3. Medical discharge after a knee injury. She noticed he came down the last 3 stairs slightly off rhythm, favoring the right. Now working as a freelance signals intelligence technician, which was a polite way of saying he accessed things he was not technically authorized to access and was good enough at it that most people preferred to pretend they didn't know. I got into the DIA server last night, he said, spinning the laptop to face her before he had fully sat down. Rutherford's mission file. Briggs told me it was deleted, she said. It was, Declan pointed at a section of the screen. This is what occupies the space where it used to be. A deletion log, a timestamp, terminal identifier. He looked up at her. Eisenhower Executive Office Building, 4th floor. The terminal assignment puts it in the NSC staff section. The deletion was executed at 4:02 a.m. on September 15th, 18 hours after Rutherford's GPS went dark. Whoever deleted it didn't wait to see how things resolved, she said. They already knew how things would resolve. Because they were the reason things resolved that way. Declan paused. There's more. He typed something. A second document opened. Your discharge from MARSUC. Specifically the OE classification on the Djibouti engagement. This code here, he pointed. I've found this exact string in 3 other discharge proceedings, all within 4 years, all involving operators who had contact with Central American supply chains in the year before their discharge. She looked at the screen. The man I shot in Djibouti, she said. His name is in a procurement document that was misfiled in a contractor database. He was connected to the supply chain that Rutherford was investigating. Declan met her eyes. You were a precision instrument aimed at a specific target and then discarded before you could ask who was doing the aiming. The warehouse was quiet for a moment. Outside, Houston continued its business. A truck on the access road, a distant siren going somewhere. How long before someone notices you've been in the DIA server? She said to Declan. I have a window. 48 hours at the outside. More likely 36. She looked at Ox. He looked back with the level patience of a man who had already made his decision and was simply waiting for the room to catch up with him. We need to be in Honduras before that window closes, she said. I have a contact, Ox said. Ruben Asante, former Guatemalan Special Operations. We worked a counter-narcotics operation together in 1997. He knows that jungle, the specific area around Sotocano, the terrain south of it, better than any map shows. Can you reach him? Already did. When Rutherford called me 3 weeks ago, I started making preparations. He paused. I've had time to think about what comes next. She nodded slowly. Picked up her coffee mug. It had gone lukewarm while they were talking. She drank it anyway. She thought about 11 words, typed Nora Callahan, her father's case. Someone needs to finish it. When can we leave? She said. Ox was already standing up. Tonight. They crossed the Guatemalan border into Honduras at 3:11 in the morning. No checkpoint. No documentation. No official record of 3 people moving through a gap in the jungle canopy where one country became another country without the formality of asking anyone's permission. Ruben Asante walked point and he made it look inevitable, the way genuinely skilled people made difficult things look. Not effortless, exactly, but correct. Like this was simply the right way to move through this space at this hour, 60 years old. Built from decades of outdoor work, the particular lean musculature of someone who moved through difficult terrain regularly and had found an efficient relationship with it. He navigated without a flashlight and without consulting his GPS, though she could see the device clipped to his pack. It was backup, not primary. He used the stars when there were stars, and when the cloud cover obscured them, he used the ground itself, the way it angled and drained, the way the vegetation changed with elevation and water proximity. He moved the way water moved through rock, not forcing anything, finding the path that was already there. She watched him for the first 10 minutes and filed him under trustworthy. She had a system for that assessment and she applied it consistently. Most people didn't make the cut quickly. Ruben made it in 10 minutes on the strength of a single observation. When he paused at the edge of a clearing, he stopped completely, listened for a full 30 seconds, ran his eyes across the open space systematically, and then moved. He did this without drama and without signaling that he was doing it. It was habit, deep enough to be automatic. You could not fake that quality of attention. You either had it or you spent long enough in situations where its absence cost you something, and then you developed it. Ox walked behind her. She could hear him, barely. Which, for a man of his size and build, was impressive in a way she did not comment on because he already knew the jungle had its own voice. Not silence, the opposite of silence. A wall of sound built from insects she could not identify, and the drip of water from the canopy despite no rain in the past 2 hours. The trees still releasing what the afternoon had deposited in their leaves, and the occasional deeper sound from further in, something large adjusting its position in the dark, and then nothing. Temperature, 68 degrees Fahrenheit, felt like more. The humidity transformed the air into something worn rather than breathed, a weight you carried without noticing until you tried to breathe deeply and found the effort slightly higher than expected. She kept her breathing steady, in through the nose, out through the mouth, slow and controlled. Her left knee was doing its thing, the thing it did after the second mile on uneven ground, that specific dull radiation from below the kneecap outward. She had learned to have a relationship with it, not to fight it, not to ignore it, acknowledge it, place it, continue. At the 2-mile mark, Ruben raised a closed fist. All 3 stopped immediately. No sound, no adjustment of weight, just stillness. Ahead, through a gap in the tree line, light, the wrong direction for dawn, the wrong quality for natural light. White, blue, and steady, generator-powered. She raised her monocular night vision. The world went green and gray. A checkpoint. 2 vehicles angled to create a funnel point. 3 men visible, probably 2 she couldn't see from this angle. Vehicles had the irregular denting of actual use. The men held themselves in a specific way, weight distributed, hands in ready position, heads moving in patterns rather than randomly. Not cartel, not civilians playing soldier trained. She lowered the monocular. Around, she said, barely a breath. Ruben was already moving left. They reached the village at 4:40 in the morning. 12 structures along a road that was more a statement of intention than an actual road. The kind of track created by repeated vehicle passage rather than any deliberate construction. Ruben knocked at a specific door in a specific way that communicated prior relationship. The door opened an older man in his 60s whose face said he had been awake already. Ruben spoke with him quietly in Spanish for 9 minutes. Spanish was functional, mission grade, calibrated for information exchange rather than conversation, and she understood most of it. The hacienda was 6 kilometers north, not abandoned. 6 months ago, maybe, but now, trucks came, every few days, sometimes more frequently. And the trucks, the man said, pausing at the specific word he wanted, were not cartel. He said it with the particular certainty of a man who had lived alongside cartel presence long enough to know its texture. The cartel was a specific thing with specific behaviors. It did not apologize. It did not escort wandering children back to the road with courteous explanations. It did not post guards who maintained a perimeter without harassing the local population. It did not care about appearances. because appearances cost effort and the cartel had never needed to make that effort. Whoever used the hacienda cared deeply about appearances. She asked about the vehicle plates. He described them, the color, the format, prefix on the number sequence. She recognized the classification before he finished the description. Government plates, not civilian government. The tier of plate issued to vehicles attached to official functions at a level where such vehicles did not get stopped at checkpoints. She thanked him. She meant it. They moved before the sky showed any intention of changing. Reuben found the position on a ridge 2 kilometers out from the hacienda. Good ground. The kind of ground that looked like a lot of other ground to someone who wasn't looking for it, which was exactly the point. A natural depression where the ridge folded back on itself created a low shelf with sight lines down to the hacienda compound and sufficient overhead cover to prevent silhouetting against any brightening of the sky. The hacienda, low and wide. Spanish colonial construction, original probably from the 1940s, maintained to the level of functional, without the additional effort that would have made it look maintained. A main building. 2 outbuildings to the east. Generator shed with a fresh concrete apron. Poured recently, the color not yet weathered to match the surrounding ground. Wire fencing more recent than the structures it enclosed, tensioned in a specific pattern she recognized from forward operating bases in eastern Afghanistan. Someone who knew what they were doing had installed that fence. She counted visible personnel. 6. Movement patterns suggested 2 more inside or in rotation. A watch schedule. 2 on perimeter, 1 static at the main entrance. She and Ox lay in the depression and watched in silence, building the picture, letting their eyes adjust to the specific light conditions so that patterns became visible where they hadn't been before. 42 minutes in, a figure came around the eastern end of the main building, and Ox went completely, absolutely still, not tactical stillness. Something different, something that came from a place below training. His right hand moved to the stock of the rifle beside him, not gripping, just touching, and his jaw set in a specific way. He didn't answer. Ox. He exhaled. Slow and deliberate through his teeth, like he was managing something that wanted to come out faster. That's Varro Gaines. She looked back at the compound, the figure along the east wall, tall, deliberate, moving with the unhurried precision of someone who knew exactly where they were going because they had gone there many times. The court-martial, she said, disclosed classified operational information to a foreign national, dismissed from service 14 months ago. His voice was contained in the way of a man who was working to keep it contained. I knew him for 11 years. I was at his promotion ceremony. I gave a speech. Watch how he's standing, she said. Nora, just watch. Silence. She watched Gaines move to the southeast corner of the compound and take up a position there. The way he stood, the direction his attention moved, outward, systematic overlapping scan patterns designed to leave no blind spot. The angle of his body relative to the main building he was supposedly guarding. 3 minutes of watching. He's not guarding the inside, she said. Ox was quiet. Every person on this perimeter is facing out. Static guard at the main door is oriented to control who enters. But Gaines, she paused. He's positioned to intercept approach from the outside. He's oriented against someone coming for the compa from the exterior. She looked at Ox. He's not keeping someone in. He's keeping someone out. The silence stretched between them, because if she was right about that, then almost everything else rearranged itself. Court-martial. Dismissal from service. Peering at a location connected to a classified investigation. All of it looked completely different depending on which direction you assumed the loyalty ran. I need you to trust my read, she said. If you're wrong. I know. He was quiet for a long moment. Okay. He said, how do we approach? She went alone. She moved down the slope in the controlled, measured way. Slow enough to be quiet, fast enough to use the darkness before it thinned further. She used the tree line and then the fence shadow and then stopped at the southeast corner, 12 meters from Gaines, and waited in stillness. She watched his rotation, timed it, noted the rhythm. Then she raised her right hand and she made a sign. Not anything in any current manual. Not a standard signal from any training protocol she had encountered. A specific combination, 3 fingers folded back in a precise sequence, thumb positioned at a specific angle, that her father had shown her on a dock in Virginia Beach when she was 9 years old and called a game. She had played it with him on Saturday mornings and thought it was something fathers and daughters did, private language, something invented for the pleasure of having a secret. She understood now that he had given it to her on purpose. For a moment exactly like this one, Gaines froze, total. Sudden stillness, the kind that happened when a body received information it wasn't expecting and needed a moment to process it. He turned toward her. She stayed visible. Still, arms readable. No sudden movements. He looked at her for a long time in the dark. Then slowly, he lifted his right hand and he answered. The correct answer. The only answer that could be correct. The response that meant, I recognize this. I know exactly where this comes from. She let the breath out, stepped out of the shadow into the ambient light at the edge of the compound. They met at the gate. He opened it. His face was guarded, not hostile, not welcoming. Face of a man who had been operating in controlled tension for a long time and was not yet ready to change that. You're Callahan's daughter, he said. Low, direct. Where is Rutherford? Inside. Safe. A pause. How many are you? 3. One on the ridge. He glanced briefly at the ridge line. He couldn't see Ox in the dark from here. But he felt the position. She could see him processing it, the way trained people felt coverage without being able to confirm it visually. Anyone know you're here? He said. Not yet. How long before that changes? 36 hours. Maybe less. He closed his eyes for one brief second, the arithmetic being run, the numbers not adding up the way he needed them to. Then he opened them. Come in, he said. The inside of the hacienda smelled like old concrete and machine oil and black beans cooked down to the simple meal of a person feeding themselves with what was available rather than what was preferred. Gaines led her through the main room, large, open, the original furniture pressed against the walls to make space for a folding table covered in papers and maps, and printed photographs weighted at the corners with ammunition cans, and stopped at a closed interior door. He knocked. Twice. A pause. Once. Come in, said a voice. James Rutherford was sitting at a small table with a topographic map spread under his coffee cup, and the look of a man who had arranged himself to appear completely at ease, and was almost succeeding. 58 years old. Tall, even seated. The frame that had been described as biggest guy in the class still present under the compression of decades. The gray at his temples now more than gray. Fully transitioned to silver in the way of men who had spent long periods in high-stress environments. He hadn't shaved in what looked like 2 weeks. His face had the particular texture of extended outdoor exposure. His eyes were sharp, not just alert. Specifically, precisely sharp in the way of someone who had spent 30 years assessing situations quickly and accurately, and had never let that faculty go dull even in enforced stillness. He looked at her. Quick, thorough, the inventory running faster than she could track. Then something shifted, not soft exactly, not emotional in any legible way. Something like recognition settling in. You walk like Patrick, he said. Not a sentiment. Information delivered precisely. We need to talk quickly, she said. Sit down. I'd rather stand. Suit yourself. He leaned back slightly in his chair. How is Ox? Processing his feelings about Gaines. He'll get there. He always takes the long route. The corner of his mouth moved, but he always gets there. He looked at her steadily. You've been to the table in the other room. I need to see what you have, he stood. Crossed to the folding table without another word. Lifted a manila envelope from beneath a topographic sheet of western Honduras and held it out. She took it. The financial documents came first. Procurement, records, routing codes, numbers moving through a sequence of accounts, structured to look like ordinary vendor payment chains. The kind of administrative scaffolding that blended into the background noise of any large institution with a significant contractor ecosystem. She could follow it because she had spent enough time adjacent to logistics and supply in operational environments to know what ordinary looked like, and to notice when something was performing ordinary, rather than being it. The money moved from a DoD contractor account through 6 intermediate transfers into an offshore holding structure registered in a jurisdiction that asked few questions. From there, it disbursed to a logistics company in Tegucigalpa. The company moved things. The manifests described agricultural equipment, fertilizer components, irrigation hardware, the general category of things that could travel in truck containers without drawing attention. The photographs showed what actually traveled: M4 carbines, 249 light machine guns, AT-4 anti-armor launchers. American military issue, identifiable by specific manufacturing marks even with the serial numbers removed. The removal had been done with a specific grinding tool that left a specific residue pattern she recognized from ATF training documentation. Not improvised, not amateur. Systematic. Practiced. The work of people who had done this many times. She turned to the email chain, trented pages. Multiple exchanges. The language was careful. Operational security in the communication patterns. specific phrasing that was designed to be interpretable two ways if read by the wrong person. She had been trained to read this kind of communication, and she read through the careful phrasing to what was actually being said, supply confirmed, routing via secondary access point, coordination with local contact on delivery schedule, and at the bottom of the chain authorizing a specific shipment adjustment. Victor Crane, Deputy Senior Director for Western Hemisphere Affairs, National Security Council. Former CIA Senior Operations Officer, Central American Desk, 1985 to 2001. She read the name 3 times, turned to the next document and stopped reading. Nar Province, Afghanistan. March 2009, it was an internal communication, not a formal report. Too conversational in tone, the language of people talking within a system rather than producing a document for the system's record. Someone had printed it and preserved it. Rutherford had found it somewhere, understood what it was, and placed it in this file. Comfather's Patrol. Pech River Valley area of Kunar Province, March 14, 2009. Routine counter ID assessment. The compound flagged as low-value storage, probably unoccupied. It was occupied. What was stored there was not agricultural equipment. Patrick Callahan had filed a report. She was looking at the evidence that the report had been received, logged into the system, and then deliberately routed to a dead-end review queue, a specific filing architecture designed to receive information and hold it permanently, never forwarding it, never flagging it for action. Someone who understood the system had built that queue for exactly this purpose. She turned the page. 25 days after the report was filed, Patrick Callahan and 3 members of his patrol were killed in what was classified as an enemy ambush in the Kunar Valley. She turned the final page, a transaction record. Partial. Whoever had assembled this file had found one piece of a larger movement, but the piece was enough. A communication from the offshore holding structure. Timestamped to the week before March 14, 2009, the communication described a patrol route, specific timing, personal, her father's patrol route, her father's timing, her father's name. She didn't know how long she stood there. At some point she became aware that she had stopped reading and was looking at the page, without processing what was on it. That the paper was bent at the bottom edge from the pressure of her hands, that her breathing had changed without her deciding to change it. She set the papers down. She walked out of the inner room, through the main space, past Gaines, who looked at her face and stepped to one side without a word. The instinct of someone who recognized a specific kind of moment and knew the correct response was to get out of the way of it. She walked through the front door into the compound, stood in the center of the open courtyard. The sky above Honduras was in the earliest stage of changing. Not light yet, not even close, but the absolute quality of the darkness had shifted slightly in the east, a suggestion of intention. The world considering whether to begin again. She breathed, in, out, slow, 1 breath, 2. Then she pressed the back of her hand to her face, once, briefly stood still for another moment, turned around and walked back inside. Rutherford was standing in the doorway of the inner room. He had not followed her out. He was leaning against the frame with his coffee cup, and the expressions of a man who had been carrying a specific weight for a long time and had just transferred it to someone else and was still determining whether that was the right thing to have done. She looked at him. Found this in 2011, she said. He didn't deny it. Part of it. Enough of it to understand what I was looking at. 2 years after he died. Yes, and you kept it. I was building a case. He set the coffee cup down on the edge of the folding table. What I had in 2011 would not have survived contact with the system. You bring incomplete documentation to a review board, the right people bury it in a week. You lose the evidence. You lose the case. You lose the ability to try again because the attempt itself has been used against you. He paused. I needed it to be complete, undeniable, impossible to route to a dead-end queue, and while you were making it undeniable, she said, Victor Crane sat in his office in Washington for 13 years. He absorbed that, yes. And I spent a decade inside a system that used me and eventually discarded me, trying to get close enough to understand why my father was dead. Her voice remained even. She kept it even with deliberate effort. And you knew. The whole time, you knew what I was looking for and you said nothing. He looked at her directly. I know. And I know I was wrong about that. You thought you were protecting me. I thought I was waiting until the case was strong enough that the truth could not be buried. I calculated that acting too early would cost the outcome. He paused. I was wrong about the cost of waiting. I understood the risk of acting too soon, and I underestimated the cost of the years themselves. She looked at him for a long moment. She was aware of the things she could say. They were lined up with some urgency. She did not say them because there was no time, because the thing that needed to happen next was more important than anything she could say right now, and because, somewhere beneath the anger and the grief and the cold specific clarity of finally understanding what she had spent a decade almost understanding, she recognized something in the fact that he was here at all. He had walked off the map, sat in a jungle for 3 weeks, not because of who her father was, because of who she was. Okay, she said. He looked at her. We bring this out, she said. In a way it cannot be buried. She looked at the papers on the folding table. Tell me how. He let out a long, slow breath, like something held under pressure for a very long time was being carefully, finally released. I have a plan, he said. I need your people to execute it. Tell me. He told her 40 minutes. She asked 12 questions. He answered 11 completely and the 12th partially, and she accepted the partial answer because she could fill the gap herself, and the gap was not structural. The core of it, a relay transmission system, Declan's equipment, integrated with the infrastructure of a decommissioned broadcast tower 12 kilometers north of the hacienda, boosted to sufficient signal strength to reach a relay point that Declan had pre-positioned in his network from Houston. Transmission would go out simultaneously to 7 recipients, 7 separate inboxes at 7 separate institutions, all receiving the same complete documentation at the same moment. The design of it was elegant in the specific way of plans made by people who had spent careers thinking about how information moved and how information got stopped. You could not intercept 7 simultaneous transmissions to 7 different institutions without knowing about all 7 in advance. And by the time you identified all 7, the transmission would be complete. The tower, she said. Tell me about it. Pointed at the topographic map, a ridge 12 kilometers north-north. The symbol for a structure, regional broadcast station, went dark in the mid-19. The equipment at the top is gone, stripped long ago, but the cable infrastructure is intact. The buried runs, the junction architecture, the antenna mounting hardware. If your signals person can integrate our equipment with the existing system, we have enough amplification to make this work. Declan can do it, from Houston. He'll walk Ox through the integration on site. Rutherford considered this. Then we need to move at dusk. I want to be at the tower before midnight, she said. I know, Ox needs the full picture. He's managing something about gains that will compromise his operational effectiveness if it's left unaddressed. I'll talk to him. A pause. Let me do that, agreed. She stepped outside to check communications while Rutherford spoke with Ox. Declan answered on the second ring. I've been going deeper into the NSC terminal records, he said, without preamble. His voice had the slightly elevated quality of someone who had been staring at screens for too long and had found something that made the fatigue irrelevant, the deletion of Rutherford's file. I traced the access credentials all the way back, and Victor Crane, direct access. Not routed through staff, he personally executed the deletion, a pause, but that's not the main thing. His credentials show a pattern going back 11 years. At least 6 separate investigations touching the same supply network, all of them deleted, or misdirected into dead-end queues, or classified to a level where they're permanently beyond standard review. Another pause, Nora. One of them is timestamped March 2009, a routing action on a patrol report from Kunar province. She already knew. She had seen the document, but hearing it said aloud, in Declan's voice over a satellite connection, with the jungle breathing around her, it had a different quality. It became real in a different register. Briggs, she said. Where is he? That's the other thing. The elevated quality in his voice shifted. I haven't been able to reach him for 8 hours. Last confirmed communication from his device was a call placed the night before last. The number is masked, heavily, professionally masked, but the call connected to a line registered to a telecommunications company in Tegucigalpa with no other apparent purpose. A pause. His phone may have been compromised before he even came to Montana. She felt the stillness move through her. Quick and cold. Timeline on your server access. I'm down to 24 hours, maybe less. I've been moving as carefully as I can, but the longer I stay in, the higher the detection probability, Declan. Pack for a remote uplink operation. I have a transmission point. You're going to walk Ox through an integration on site. A pause while he processed this. What equipment is available at the point? Decommissioned broadcast station. Cable infrastructure intact. Antenna hardware present, she could hear him thinking. Specific silence of someone running technical calculations. Frequency range on the antenna hardware? I'll get you specs within the hour, that'll work. I'll have everything set up on my end. A pause. Keep trying, Briggs. I will. And Nora's voice changed slightly. The document I found in the contractor database, the one connecting your Djibouti target to the supply network. I went back in and pulled more detail. His role in the network was specifically logistics coordination between the warehouse facility near Soto Cano and the southward distribution routes. A pause. He was one of maybe 3 people who knew the full routing. If he had been questioned, he would have led back to Crane, yes, so they needed him removed before any investigation could reach him. And they used me to do it, yes. She was quiet for a moment. Get ready to walk Ox through the integration, she said. We move at dusk. She put the earpiece away, stood in the courtyard for a moment. The pre-dawn dark was thinning almost imperceptibly. The insects were slightly louder, which was often a harbinger of the light's approach. The generator shed hummed a low, steady note. She went back inside. Ox was standing against the far wall when she returned to the main room, arms uncrossed. That was different from when she had left. He was looking at Gaines, who was standing near the table with the maps, and the look between them was not resolved. Not fully, but different from what it had been. Rutherford was seated at the table. He met her eyes and gave her a slight nod. It had happened. Whatever needed to happen had happened. Ox looked at Nora. You should have reached out, he said to Gaines. Not loudly. I couldn't reach out without pulling you in, Gaines said. And I didn't know yet if bringing you in was safe. The same people who arranged the court-martial. They had reach I couldn't fully map. I didn't know who else they'd gotten to. 14 months, Varro. I know. Ox was quiet for a moment. Then he made a sound, not a sigh exactly, not something else exactly. The sound of a man releasing a conclusion he had reached without enough information and arriving at a different one. He crossed the room, extended his hand. Gaines took it, one shake. Solo, additional words, because there was nothing that needed to be added to that. Nora set the tactical situation in front of the room, the tower, the timeline, the 24-hour window, the 7 recipients, and the last element, Gaines, she said. We need a decoy position. Crane's people are moving, Briggs is unreachable, which means information has been leaked whether intentionally or through the compromise of his phone. We need time at the tower without interruption. Someone has to give them something else to focus on, she did not say. This is the most dangerous part of the plan. He already knew. I'll stay here, he said. You don't. I'll stay here. Not said twice for emphasis. Said once clearly, the finality of a decision that had been made some time ago and simply hadn't been stated until now. I'll give them a reason to stop here before they get to the tower. That buys you the time you need. Ox looked at him. Something passed between them. Not everything repaired. That would take time and the right kind of quiet. But the first piece of repair placed, Ox crossed the room again, extended his hand again. Gaines took it again, and this time the shake lasted a moment longer. And this time, there was something in it that hadn't been there the first time. They moved at dusk. The light in Honduras at that hour went amber first, then deep red, then a bruised purple that held for a surprisingly long time before the dark came fully in. Reuben led, Ox behind him, Nora at the rear, covering their exit vector as they cleared the compound gate. She was the last one through. She paused at the gate. Gaines was standing at it, looking at her with the steady, settled expression of a man who had made his decision and was on the other side of it, no longer deciding, just being decided. If this doesn't, she started. It will, he said. I'm saying if. It will. A pause. Your father would have done exactly this. She looked at him, then she nodded once, and stepped into the jungle, 12 kilometers. Reuben set a pace that was designed to cover all our ground rather than make time. The difference being that making time required a sprint mentality, and covering ground required the kind of sustainable efficiency that got you to the destination still functional. She matched the pace. Ox matched it. Nobody talked. The jungle at night was a different country than the jungle at dawn. The sound wall shifted, different insects taking over from the ones that owned the daylight margins. The canopy was denser with shadow and the ground below it was darker in ways that required constant micro-adjustments to maintain footing without losing pace. Her knee was doing what it did. She acknowledged it and continued. 40 minutes in, Ox fell into step beside her. They walked in silence for a time that stretched long enough to comfortable with itself. Then he said, quietly, Rutherford told me about Gaines. The full version, I know. He told me about what you found in there, too. He paused. Your father. She said nothing. I stood at his memorial, Ox said. His voice was doing the work of holding something together, and the work was showing. I gave a speech. I talked about the man I knew, the operator I'd stood next to, the losses we'd all taken. And I believed the story we were given. I believed it because—" He stopped. "Because the alternative was unthinkable," she said. "Yes, we both believed it. Because the story was good and the alternative was unthinkable, and believing the alternative would have cost more than either of us had available at the time." She paused. "It's still unthinkable. And it's still true." He was quiet for a long stretch of jungle. "We're going to finish this," he said finally. "Yes," she said, and she kept walking. 20 minutes further on, Rutherford drew even with her. He moved carefully on the uneven ground. Not struggling but deliberately, the way of a man who had learned to be honest about what his body could and couldn't do quickly and who applied that honesty without drama. She matched his pace without comment, and they walked together for a while in the way of people who were past the need for conversation as social performance. "He talked about you," Rutherford said. She kept her eyes forward. "Patrick. Before any of this. Long before. He talked about you the way he talked about things that mattered to him. Understated, almost sideways, like drawing direct attention to them would somehow diminish them." He paused. He said, "She sees the thing behind the thing. Took me a while to understand what he meant. Eventually I figured out he was saying you saw through surfaces, faster than people who'd been doing this work for decades." She didn't answer immediately. "He would have hated the headline," she said finally, "when this comes out. His name in the papers, he would have hated that completely, absolutely. But he would have understood why it was necessary, yes." Rutherford paused. "He would have understood exactly why." They kept walking. The ridge with the tower was somewhere ahead in the dark, getting incrementally closer in the way that destinations got closer when you committed to moving toward them without pausing to consider the distance. She thought about a man who had reported what he found to the channels that existed for that purpose, because he believed those channels were what they claimed to be. Who had paid the price of that belief in a way that was irreversible, and that she had been living with for 15 years, and understanding incompletely until tonight? She thought about those channels. She thought about Victor Crane, who had built the mechanism that routed her father's report to a dead-end queue. She kept walking. The tower was exactly where the map said it would be, which, in her experience, was never guaranteed. Maps were records of intention. The ground had its own opinions. But the tower was there, concrete base wide and solid, steel lattice rising 60 feet into the canopy, and above it, the top structure catching the very faint available light and giving it back as a dull metallic gleam. Broadcast equipment at the crown was long stripped, removed or rusted to nothing in the decades since the station went dark, but the skeleton remained. The cable runs along the exterior structure. The junction boxes at each level, painted over so many times the paint had built up into something almost architectural. The antenna mounting hardware at the crown, solid despite everything, all of it still connected, through buried runs under 3 decades of root growth and soil shift, to the cable infrastructure that had once powered this place. Reuben walked the perimeter first, methodical, hands touching the concrete, eyes traveling up the lattice to assess each level. "Solid," he said. "The concrete is old, but it was poured thick. The lattice has surface rust, but the structural welds are sound." Ox was already on his earpiece with Declan. Nora looked up at 60 feet of steel lattice. Then she started climbing. The maintenance platform at the crown was a steel grate, 4 feet by 8 feet, bolted to the primary structural members at the top of the lattice. It had a half railing on 3 sides, the 4th side open, where equipment access had required an unobstructed edge. She tested the grate with her weight before committing to it. Solid. She moved to the northeast corner and set up her position. The Remington came off her back, into her hands, and the weight of it, this time, was different from every other time she had held it in the past 14 months. Not complicated, not laden with the accumulated uncertainty of what it meant that she was holding it. Just right, settled. The weight of something that was exactly where it was supposed to be. She set up the position methodically. Scope to her eye. Nightforce NXS 5.5-22x56. Set to the magnification appropriate for her expected engagement distances. Check to angles. The south approach road. There, 400 meters partially screened by the tree line at the base of the ridge. The eastern trail, there, 260, crossing ground that would require a flanking movement. The open area between the tree line and the tower base. There, various distances, good sight lines across most of it. She noted the environmental conditions. Temperature, 63 degrees Fahrenheit. Colder at elevation than at ground level, as expected. Wind from the northeast at 9 miles per hour, steady, not gusting, which was favorable. Humidity still high enough to add measurable density to the air at extended range, affecting the drag coefficient on the bullet. Her father had taught her the compensation tables when she was 10. A Saturday morning at a diner outside Dam Neck, Virginia, after a morning on the range that she had complained about because she would have preferred to sleep in. He had spread a napkin on the table and drawn the table in his neat small handwriting and pushed it across to her. "Memorize this," he had said. "You'll use it more than you think." She had memorized it. She hadn't known what she was memorizing it for. She understood now. Not just what the table was for, but what the giving of it meant. He had been preparing her for things he could not name directly, giving her tools for situations he could only describe obliquely. Your body knows things your brain hasn't figured out yet. He'd been right. Her body had known what 14 months in a Montana cabin was for, had known the go bag should stay packed, had known the rifle should stay on the wall where she could reach it, had known this moment was coming even when her brain was still deciding whether to believe it. She settled her breathing. 4 counts in, 2 held, 4 out, pressed her cheek to the stock, and waited. Bellow Ox was doing something painstaking with cable connectors and Declan's voice in his earpiece. "Not that port," Declan said. "Patient. The one above it. The secondary junction should have a different connector type. It'll feel slightly different. Threading is coarser. I feel it. Good. The adapter, how many of these have you done before?" "Enough. Right." The sound of Declan recalibrating his estimation of who he was working with. "Okay. Let me check signal from my end." Rutherford stood at the base of the tower, watching the approach roads, his radio in one hand. He had not asked to climb. He was 58 years old, and he knew which tasks were his and which were not, and guarding the base of the tower while 2 younger people did what needed to be done above and inside it, that was his task. First, check in from Gaines, all quiet at the hacienda. 3 vehicles noted in the general area. Not approaching, she filed that. 3 vehicles. Not approaching, yet she kept her breathing slow. Below, Ox's voice. "We're live," Declan in her earpiece, confirming connection. "Signal strength is actually better than I projected. Upload beginning now." Pause in which she could almost hear him running calculations. 21 minutes at this transfer rate. "Call it 23 to be conservative." 23 minutes. She kept her eye at the scope. Kept her breathing slow. Then Rutherford's voice on the radio, low and controlled in the specific way of a man managing information carefully. "Movement. South approach. 4 vehicles. 6 hours, her estimate, based on the information she had. But Briggs had been unreachable longer than she had known, which meant Crane had had more time than her calculation assumed, which meant the people who had driven to this ridge in the dark had left earlier than her timeline predicted. 4 vehicles. She moved her scope to the south approach, moving without lights, which told her about their training level. Amateurs needed lights because they needed to see. These people were moving in the dark because they had already fixed their destination on their navigation and didn't need to see the road. They needed to arrive without being seen. 4 vehicles. Standard tactical spacing. Lead and trail vehicles set back from the middle pair, creating a box formation. She had traveled in versions of this herself. 8 to 12 people, probably 10, figure at the rise who separated from a vehicle and moved to an observation position before the others dismounted was experienced. That was not the behavior of someone who had been briefed on a tactical scenario and was following instructions. That was someone who had done enough of these to have internalized the priority sequence. They stopped at the rise, right where she thought they would, where she would have stopped. The ground was good there, elevated, with the open area between them and the tower allowing observation and covering fire, the vehicles providing cover and an elevated platform for anyone who wanted to shoot from a vehicle. They were good. The open ground between the rise and the tower was 400 meters. She had 19 minutes. "Ox," she said into her earpiece, barely audible. "I see them," he said. "Stay with the integration. The connection is the mission. Everything else is secondary." The pause. The pause of a man who deeply disagreed with a risk allocation but recognized the logic. "Copy. The figures at the rise set up positions. Tactical, coordinated, moving without obvious verbal communication. Visual signals, practiced." She watched them and assessed. Then the radio came live, a voice she did not know. American. Mid-Atlantic accent, the specific flat vowels of someone who had spent long enough in institutional environments that regional origin had been smoothed out. Calm in the way of someone who was genuinely calm rather than performing it. Commander Rutherford. A pause. "I believe a conversation would be more productive than what's about to happen otherwise." She looked down at Rutherford 60 feet below. He looked up at her. She shook her head slightly. Not yet. He keyed his radio. Mr. Crane, not a question. You identified me. The list of people who delete NSC files at 4 a.m. is short. A pause. I didn't come to stop the upload. I think we both know it's too late for that to be the goal. Another pause. I came because I want someone to understand what this is before the version without context becomes the only version. Rutherford's voice was flat. I'm listening. This network, what you've found, what you're sending, it didn't begin as what it became. I want to be precise about that. Because precision matters. Crane paused. It began as policy. As a response to a specific geopolitical situation in Central America in the early 1980s, when the assessment was that the official channels were insufficient and the unofficial ones needed to be built quickly. That's the origin. Multiple administrations, multiple oversight cycles that should have caught it and were managed so that they didn't. By the time I was fully inside it in 1989, it was already an inherited condition rather than a choice, and it kept going, Rutherford said. Each generation of officials received it as a fact on the ground. Changing it required acknowledging what it was, which required acknowledging what it had done. The institutional incentive structure did not support that kind of acknowledgement. Patrick Callahan, Rutherford said, a long silence. That, Crane said, was the mechanism doing what it was built to do. Not a decision in the sense of someone sitting down and choosing. A response. An automatic institutional response to a report that threatened the structure's continuity. He paused. I am aware of how that sounds. He had a daughter, Rutherford said. Yes, she was 11 years old, I know. She has spent the better part of her adult life trying to understand why he was dead, inside the same system that arranged his death. And you knew. The radio was quiet for a long moment. Yes, Crane said. Just that. In her earpiece. Declan, quiet. 11 minutes, she kept her scope moving. The figures at the rise were holding position, waiting. One of them had not been still in the way the others were still. A slight restlessness, positioning adjustment that didn't fit the pattern of someone simply maintaining a cover position. Watching it, processing it, and then one figure separated from the rise position and moved left, into the tree line on the eastern edge of the open ground, and was immediately no longer visible against the dark background, flanking, but not toward the tower, toward the cable access point on the eastern side of the ridge base. She understood it instantly. You don't storm a defended elevated position if you have another option. You sever the capability the position is being used to protect. Cut the cable run from the correct junction point, and the transmission dies regardless of what's happening on the platform 60 feet up. They had a technical person. Of course they had a technical person. She moved her scope. Found the figure in the eastern tree line, tracking. Moving at pace now, no longer concealing movement speed, prioritizing arrival time. 60 meters from the cable junction. 50, the weapon in the figure's hand was raised. She had 4 seconds, maybe 3. She did the math without deciding to do it. Distance, 260 approximately. Angle flat, slight downward. Wind, 9 miles per hour northeast, consistent. Humidity factor already accounted for in her scope adjustments. Temperature compensation for the Remington-specific drift characteristic below 65 degrees. 0.2 of a minute of angle to the right. She was not aiming at the person. She was aiming at the weapon. The shot, she had been told, in an early skills evaluation, was not technically feasible at this range in these light conditions. The evaluator had never met Patrick Callahan, had never sat across from a napkin at a diner in Dam Neck and been told to memorize something because you'll use it more than you think. She exhaled to the midpoint, found the pause, squeezed the Remington, spoke once. Clean, definitive. The sound of it expanding outward through the jungle darkness and the jungle absorbing it. The figure in the tree line went down. Not dead. She had not aimed to kill. The weapon was gone from the hand. She had seen the impact, spray of metal and plastic. The person was down, moving but not rising, the arm that had held the weapon not functioning correctly. One shot, the cable junction intact, in her earpiece after a beat that felt much longer than it was. Connection is clean, Declan's voice. Then, 8 minutes, she was already moving her scope back to the rise. The figures there had reacted, cover positions, weapons up, scanning for the origin of the shot. They had training. They had response protocols. They were executing them. Below her on the radio. Crane's voice, and something in it was different now. The careful, measured quality was still present, but underneath it was something she recognized. Specific sound of a calculation that had been running for a long time arriving at a result. I think, he said, that the conversation portion of this evening has concluded. Yes, Rutherford said. It has. A long pause. Longer than functionally necessary. I'm not going to run, Crane said quietly. I want to say that before everything changes, I've been doing this work for 38 years. I understand what comes next, and I'm not going to run from it. A pause. I'm tired. Genuinely. I have been tired for a long time, and I think the carrying of it is over now, regardless of what I do. Rutherford said nothing for a moment. Then the woman on that platform lost her father because of your mechanism. She has been carrying something for 15 years that she should have been told 15 years ago. That is what you built. Whatever else you believed it was for, silence. Yes, Crane said. That is what I built. 5 minutes. 4. She kept her scope on the approach. The figures at the rise maintained their positions. They were waiting for direction that was not coming in the form they expected. Crane's voice had gone quiet on the radio. 3 minutes. He thought about her father. Not the dock. Not the diner. Just him, the specific quality of presence that she had spent 15 years trying to reconstruct from memory and photographs and the testimony of people who had known him. The way he stood. The way he held his hands. The way he had laughed at something a long time ago on a beach in Coronado, and the man standing next to him had laughed too, and they had both kept going. 2 minutes 30 seconds, Declan said. She didn't move. 20. 5. Upload complete. And then, in a different register, the register of someone who had been watching a progress bar move toward completion while trying not to make it mean too much too early, and was now allowing it to mean what it meant. All 7 confirmed received. Nora. It's done. She closed her eyes, held that for exactly 1 second, then opened them, and kept watching, because done was not over. And she had not survived this long by confusing the two. The figures at the rise began to move back toward the vehicles. Not immediately. There was a pause, communication, assessment. The realization arriving in stages that the objective of the evening was no longer achievable, and had not been achievable for some number of minutes. Then, one by one, they moved, back the way they had come. Dark, quiet, orderly, professionals. She watched them until the vehicles were gone, then watched the empty road for 5 more minutes. It stayed empty. She lowered the Remington, lay flat on the maintenance platform, let the grate take her weight. Looked up through the steel lattice at the sky above. The cloud cover had shifted during the evening. A gap in the east. Through it a few stars, not many but visible. A kind of visibility that felt like something given rather than something owed. She looked at them. Just looked for a moment, that had no tactical content whatsoever. Victor Crane was standing on the south approach road when the Honduran federal law enforcement vehicles arrived. He had called them himself. That was the part she learned later, that he had stepped away from his convoy, used his personal phone, and requested their presence at this location. Not demanded, requested. In the specific language of a man who understood that he had lost the leverage to demand anything and had chosen to accept that fact rather than pretend otherwise. Standing in the road when they arrived. Not in a vehicle, not behind cover. Standing in the open, visible, waiting, she watched it through her scope from the top of the tower. 400 meters in low light. She could not read his expression. The distance was too great. But she could see the shape of him. The way he stood. The weight of 64 years and 38 years of this specific work, distributed across a frame that looked, from this distance, exhausted in a way that went down to the cellular level, not frightened, not defiant. Just done. She understood what that felt like. Stellan Briggs was found in a hotel room in Tegucigalpa at 6:40 in the morning, alive, unhurt. Sitting in the chair by the window when the door opened, wearing yesterday's clothes, with the expression of a man who had been waiting for the situation to resolve, and was relieved that it had. His phone had been compromised at the airport. A hardware interception device inserted at a charging station, the kind of interception that required resources and advanced knowledge of his travel, which told her something about the level of surveillance that had been running against anyone connected to the Rutherford situation. He had understood his phone was compromised at some point during his 31 hours in the hotel room and had stopped using it. He had provided nothing of value to the people who kept him there. And when they left, because the upload had happened and the leverage had evaporated, he had sat in the chair by the window and waited to be found. She was with Ox in the truck, heading north. When Declan sent the message that Briggs had been located, she sent back, "Tell him we're at the border crossing in 4 hours." Declan sent back, "He says he'll be there." He was, standing beside a rental car at the border crossing when they arrived, a paper cup of coffee in his hand, looking like a man who had been through something that he had decided to categorize as moderately difficult rather than genuinely terrible, because genuinely terrible would require processing, and he hadn't had time yet. He looked at her when she got out of the truck, then at Rutherford, who had climbed out of the back seat and was stretching the particular stretch of someone who had been in a vehicle for a long time. "You got it out," Briggs said. "Yes," she said. He nodded. Something settled in his face that had been held at a specific tension. "I wanted on record that I drove to Montana voluntarily and was operating entirely on my own judgment, and had no regrets about any of it. Noted, I'm also going to have a complicated relationship with charging stations for the foreseeable future." She almost smiled. It surprised her slightly. "That's understandable." He looked at the sky, at the border crossing infrastructure, at Rutherford, who was having a quiet conversation with Ruben Asante 10 feet away, both of them speaking in the understated way of people who had been through something together and were on the other side of it. "His name is going to be in a lot of headlines," Briggs said. "Her father's." He didn't have to specify, I know. He would have hated that, completely. But he would have understood why. She looked at Briggs. He would have. Briggs finished his coffee, crushed the cup carefully, dropped it into a trash receptacle with the precision of someone who did small things correctly. "I have approximately 9 formal statements to give in the next 3 weeks and an HR review that is going to be an adventure." A pause. "For what it's worth, this was right. What we did was right." She nodded. He got in his rental car. She watched him go. The hacienda was quiet when they returned to collect Rutherford's documents. The door was open. Folding table was as they had left it. Papers organized, weighted at the corners, everything placed with care. The equipment intact. The generator shed shut down, the absence of its hum making the space feel larger than it was. Voro Gaines was gone. She stood in the doorway of the main room, looked at the table. The papers. The coffee mug he had apparently used at some point and left on the table, placed there with the same deliberateness. Everything else in the room had been placed. He thought about a man who had been erased officially, by a process designed to silence him, and who had spent 14 months in a jungle doing the work of making sure a truth he wasn't supposed to know about made it out of the dark. Who had stayed behind so they could move forward? Who had made that choice without being asked and without making anything of the making of it? She thought about choices like that, how they were usually quiet, how they were usually made by people who didn't announce them. She picked up the coffee mug, set it back down in the same place. Walked outside. Ruben was at the fence line, watching the morning arrive. He left before dawn. Ruben said, "I know. He asked me to tell you. He's fine. He'll be fine." She looked at the space where Gaines had been standing when she left the compound the night before, the gate. The particular quality of stillness that he had occupied. "I believe him," she said. First news alert came at 7:22 in the morning. Declan. A text with a link and 2 words above it. "It's running." She clicked the link. The headline was precisely calibrated. The kind of precision that came from a journalist who understood that a well-documented story didn't need inflammatory language, and that inflammatory language would in fact damage the credibility of what the documentation demonstrated. She read the first 4 paragraphs in the front seat of Ox's truck while he drove north, and the Honduran countryside went from dark to lit around them. Patrick Callahan's name was in the 3rd paragraph. She read it twice, set the phone on her knee, looked out the window. She thought. He would have been furious about the headline, she thought. He also would have understood that some things were more important than his preferences about headlines. She picked the phone up. Read the name again, then put the phone in her pocket. Ox drove. He had a quality in certain situations of filling space with the correct amount of presence, enough to be felt, not so much as to crowd. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. From the back seat, without opening his eyes. "How's the knee?" She glanced back at Rutherford. "Fine. Still lying, I see. Still manageable." Different word. Same function. The corner of his mouth. "You did well." She faced forward again. "Watch the road. You sound like him." She said. He opened his eyes. "I'll take that as the highest compliment available." "It is," she said. She flew back to Montana 2 days later. El Paso to Salt Lake to Kalispell. She moved through the airports with the same attentiveness she moved through everything, noting exits, measuring distances, reading the room the way she read all rooms. The habit did not require effort. It ran underneath everything else, the way certain things you learned early enough became infrastructure rather than action. The rental car from Kalispell smelled like synthetic lemon and someone's prior road trip. She drove north on Highway 93 through flat agricultural ground that gave way to foothills that gave way to the beginning of the mountains, the landscape shifting in the incremental way of landscapes that understood the value of a buildup. A story told through terrain. The lake appeared first in the rearview mirror, then it drew even with the car on the left side. Then the road curved and there was the turnoff. She took at the cabin, 14 feet wide, 22 feet long, the door east, the window north, the rifle on the west wall where she had replaced it before she left. She went inside, set the go bag by the door, stood in the center of the main room for a moment. Cabin smelled like cold and wood smoke and the faint residual of 14 months of solitary occupation, a specific smell that was both impersonal and completely hers. She stood in it and let it register. She was back. The cabin was the same. She was not exactly the same, which was not a problem. She crossed to the table, picked up the photograph. Her father still squinting in whatever sun that was. Still almost smiling. Still wearing the civilian clothes that didn't quite fit the shape of who he was. She looked at him for a long time. Then she set him back against the coffee mug with the cracked handle, at eye level, across from her chair. Exactly where he had been. She sat down, looked at him. "Someone finished it," she said. He kept almost smiling. She made oatmeal, black coffee, sat across from the photograph and ate breakfast in the specific way she had eaten breakfast for 14 months. Same bowl, same proportions, same chair. Some things were worth keeping. Not because they were required, because they were hers, chosen deliberately. Constructed from what she had available in the period when construction was what she could manage. She finished, washed the bowl and the mug, set them in the drying rack, stood at the north window and looked at the lake. It was doing its November thing. The ice at the edges had extended further overnight. The far shore was barely visible in the low afternoon light. The surface of the water where it was still liquid had a specific texture, slightly riffled by the wind, not agitated, the particular movement of something that was deep enough to absorb a great deal of force and express it as surface texture rather than disruption. She stood there for a long time. She thought about Patrick Callahan. Not the way she usually thought about him, the specific memories, the dock and the diner and the Saturday mornings and the photograph on the table. She thought about him in a broader way, the shape of a life, the way a person could move through the world with a specific quality of attention and care and still be, despite that quality, because of that quality, taken from it by something that had been built in the dark by people who understood that the dark was where such things had to be built to survive. She thought about the fact that he had known this was possible, not that this specific thing would happen to him, but that the world contained this possibility, that the structures humans built to protect each other could be turned, quietly and gradually, against the people they were supposed to protect. He had known this and he had done the work anyway, had reported what he found to the channels that existed for exactly that purpose, had believed those channels were what they claimed to be, or had decided that believing in them, acting as if they were what they claimed, was necessary to the work even if the belief was not certain. She thought that was a specific kind of courage, not the courage of the obvious moment, the courage of daily, incremental fidelity to something you could not prove would hold. She thought she understood it better now than she had before Honduras. She thought she intended to carry it forward. Outside, the light was going. November in Montana moved the light early, sky beginning its long slide toward dark at an hour that still felt like afternoon. Gold at the horizon, red above the gold. Then the bruised purple that held longer than you expected before the dark came in completely. She went to the door, opened it, stood in the doorway, the threshold, the edge, the specific place between inside and outside that was neither fully one thing nor the other, and looked at the lake in the going light behind her, the cabin, the photograph on the table, the rifle on the wall, the go big by the door, not unpacked. She hadn't unpacked it. She had thought about it. Had stood with the bag in her hands and thought, this is a choice I can make. The choice to put things away. The choice to indicate to herself and to no one else that this is over, that the cabin is now the permanent thing rather than the temporary thing. That the oatmeal and the 6 miles in the photograph and the careful life are the destination rather than the interval. She had set the bag down without unpacking it. Not because she knew what came next. She didn't know what came next. She had no information about what came next that she hadn't had before Honduras, beyond the information that she was capable of, more than she had been allowing herself to do, and that capability did not go away when you stopped using it. She stood in the doorway. She breathed not the 4-count discipline of the tower, not the measured, controlled breathing of a position being held and a shot being calculated. Just ordinary breathing, in and out. The kind that happened without instruction, that the body managed without supervision. That 15 years of controlled deliberate breathing had made her slightly suspicious of, because ordinary things that happened without effort seemed after a while like things that couldn't be trusted. She was learning to trust it again, the ordinary breath, the ordinary morning, the ordinary fact of being alive in a place that was hers, with a decision unmade in front of her, which was, she was discovering, not the same as a problem. An unmade decision was just a space. You could stand in a space without it demanding resolution. The lake made its sound, ice at the edges, water at the center. The low patient groaning that she had been listening to for 14 months in the dark at 4:43 in the morning. The sound that the world made when it was in the process of becoming something more solid than it currently was. She had thought, when she first came to the cabin, that she was hiding. She had thought later that she was waiting. She understood now that she had been doing both, and that both were what was needed, and that the difference between hiding and waiting was not always legible from the inside of the experience. Sometimes you only understood which one it had been after it was over. It was over now. She was Patrick Callahan's daughter. She was the woman who had stood on a decommissioned broadcast tower in western Honduras in the dark and made a shot at 260 meters that an evaluator had told her was not technically feasible, and the evaluator had been wrong. She was the person that James Rutherford had sent 11 words to specifically, because he believed she was the person who could finish something that needed finishing. She was 26 years old, and she had no idea what came next. She was standing in the doorway instead of sitting at the table, which was, she had decided, sometime in the last hour without quite noticing the decision being made, a fine place to stand. The gold went to red, the red went to purple. In another 20 minutes the dark would come in fully and the lake would continue its sound. That low, patient, permanent groaning, ice extending toward the center, the whole surface moving toward something solid. And she would still be here in the doorway, not deciding, not waiting, just standing in the space between what had finished and what had not yet begun, which was, she thought, maybe the most honest place she had ever occupied. The lake groaned. Permanent. She listened to it the way she had listened to it every morning for 14 months. And for the first time, the sound of it did not feel like waiting. It felt like company, like something that had been there all along, holding the space until she was ready to be in it. She stood in the doorway, she breathed, and the lake kept making its sound, and the dark kept coming in, and the stars appeared one at a time in the spaces the clouds left open, and none of it required anything from her except to be present in it, which she was, which she would continue to be, for now, for tonight, for the morning that was already somewhere in the dark ahead of her, already preparing its cold and its 6 miles and its boulder and its almost light. She was here.